Hello everybody, my name is Ray, and today we are going to be sharing different villagers in Minecraft. These villagers are not currently in the game, but I feel like if we had these kinds of villagers, it would be pretty cool. And so to start, we're going to start with the Oasis Villager. This is what I think the Oasis Villager's house is going to look like. I think it would be like a sandy biome, and then it would gradually get into this oasis area with oak trees, and there would be some bees. And I think this villager specifically would be a Fletcher. One of the things I would like to have in each of these villagers' houses is kind of something that they specialize in. So each villager has their different jobs, and I like to think that an oasis is where the Fletcher started. The Fletcher started out with just sticks and flint and arrows, and even though they're in the middle of nowhere, they still pride themselves on having that kind of combat ability out in the middle of nowhere. I made the villager houses bigger, and I wanted there to be candles to kind of incorporate the bees that are here in this environment. This is what I would imagine the chest to look like. It would be kind of like a beekeeper slash Fletcher. And it's not necessarily that there's only Fletchers in oasis. In an oasis, there's not only Fletchers, but I like to think that the majority of villagers are Fletchers. And as I go through each of these villagers, you'll kind of see I want there to be, like, every single village is basically the same. You have like a few librarians, you have a cleric sometimes, and you have like a blacksmith. Within these little biome-based villagers, I like to think of there's a majority of one villager, but you can technically still get the job blocks for all the other villagers if you truly want. So this is the Oasis Villager, and the next villager will be the Flower Forest Villager. This would also have some bees because you know the flower forest has bees that spawn on the trees, but I would like to think that farmers, especially carrot farmers, specifically live here because there are rabbits that are here within the flower forest biome. And I like to think, like, instead of having a backyard where there's not much in it, or maybe there's like a cow, they have a few rabbits that they end up breeding and they use for meat. Even though you can't necessarily breed a villager with meat, I do notice that a lot of the villagers have animal pens. And again, I made this bigger, and this is what I would imagine the chest to look like. It would be some carrots, some saplings. In here would probably be some of the flowers outside. I didn't put too much in this chest because I think it would be more so like food. And I'd like to think that there's ferni within the little houses, and sometimes you can find coal and food, and that would just be kind of a really cool experience to see within each of these little villagers, where sometimes they have ferni and they can actually cook their food, sometimes they have chests and they have their food like normal, and it's just kind of more interactive, you know what I mean? So that is the Flower Forest Biome Villager. The next villager house I'm going to show you will be the Jungle Villager house. We have jungle temples. I think a jungle villager would be really cool too. And honestly, I think a librarian focusing in the jungle, it would be really cool, where you can find like chiseled bookshelves, or you can find a regular bookshelf. Finding the chiseled ones would be cool because maybe you could get some enchants, although they wouldn't be OP, of course. And I like to think each one of the villagers have like little flower pots of their biomes plant. And so if you're having trouble like cutting down a tree fully, you can just get a sapling here. Not that that would be a necessity. And I like to think that you could find a clock, you could find some redstone, lanterns, because you would find a lantern because the librarian villager can sell lanterns, which is pretty cool, and they can sell redstone and clocks. And so you could find that there, as well as cocoa beans and books and of course emeralds. And I think it would just be more of an expansion on stuff that's in the jungle, because I feel like when you go into a jungle biome, there isn't a lot to see. Like, you'll see a jungle temple every so often, but I think we could have some kind of background story where the villagers could be the ones who made those villager temples, and then you could find a small village by the temple, and you could find people worshiping the temple and things like that. I think that'd be cool, especially since the librarian, although there's no redstone, there are clocks, so they're very time oriented, And maybe the jungle temple can have a cleric as well as a librarian, and the cleric would dabble in redstone and things like that. But yeah, I think the jungle would have a librarian for sure, because that would just mean you'd have more items within the jungle. You could find a library. I find that jungles just aren't too interesting, but that's the next villager that I have in mind. Next will be the mangrove swamp villager. I love the way this house looks. I know it looks very one note with the red. I think when we get more of a color palette in the mahogany jungle, it'll be cool. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this type of villager before, but it is a swamp villager. And whether you're in a mangrove swamp or another swamp, this is what villagers look like. And the village will not spawn within a swamp, whether it be mangrove or otherwise. And I feel like we're missing out, because I think it looks pretty cool. If this villager didn't have the cleric profession, it would still look very swampy, but I do think that he looks kind of magical. He looks kind of like more of a wizard. And I also noticed that you can get a leather worker by a cauldron, so maybe the cauldron wouldn't work here, or if it did, you'd probably have one villager as a leather worker and the other villager as a cleric, if you wanted 2 villagers in this house. But here's the chest. I like to think that they would have invisibility potions, and that's how the wandering traders would get their invisibility potions, because the clerics end up making them. And you can find some emerald slime balls, especially for the frogs. You'd find some glowstone and redstone, especially as you go into the cleric and they sell glowstone itself, and redstone, of course, when you first start trading with them. And I think it'd just be really cool to see that. And it would kind of be like a clearing out of the trees. There would still be trees around, but it would be more of a clearing. And then you just walk into this village where there's a bunch of like mud everywhere, and you try to navigate through the village even though your feet are kind of sinking, and you'd get a bunch of frogs. I think it'd be cute if villagers had pet frogs, but that's just me. Our next villager house will be the Cherry Grove villager house. I like to think of the villagers here would be the people who make banners, specifically the shepherds, because shepherds work with looms, they work with banners, and I think even though they're cutesy and pink and there are blossoms falling everywhere, flower petals, it's so cute, I think they'd be the type of villagers to be very strong. And they'd probably have a illager banner here, or maybe they could make a villager banner, which I don't know, I don't have the banner skills to make a villager banner, but I'm sure there is one where you can make a banner specifically with a villager head, and maybe they'd have it like on the walls. And I'd like to think that in their chest they'd have a bunch of pink dye, of course. They'd have a banner pattern or 2, maybe a flower one based on the flower petals around. They'd have shears, they have some wool, and I just think it'd be very cutesy, but also really cool to see more decorations within villages, especially because sometimes when you go into a village, you don't really see paintings or anything like that. And if we had a shepherd specifically putting up like banners, I think that would be really cool, and it would be a creative way to kind of share what you can do with banners within Minecraft. Our next villager house will be the hilly villagers. I like to think of these villagers as villagers who are on top of mountains, and they're going to be very similar to other villagers that I've made. But I think that the hilly villagers, the villagers that live up in the mountains, would be specifically the masons. They would make bricks, they would have a bunch of clay, and it would be near the shores, and it'd be similar to the plains village in a sense, because I like to think of this furnace as like an oven, and that's why there's bricks here. But at the same time, it's where you can find some suspicious items. So within the mason village, within this hilly village, you'd probably find some suspicious gravel, some suspicious sand, and maybe a brush. Because if you've never really looked into what you can find with suspicious sand, suspicious gravel, you probably will just break it and not really care about it because you're not really looking at it too closely. I think it would just be cool if you could get these blocks in-game without like using cheats. And if you could get like blocks of them within a hilly village, I think that would be really cool, because then first of all you could like use this gravel and you could like do this to get this suspicious stuff out of it. I don't think anything's in here. I just realized. No, nothing. Okay. But imagine if there was stuff in there and then it would be generated to where, oh, this is like an emerald, or oh, this is like a pickaxe or a hoe, and this is like a diamond perhaps, or a piece of gold. I don't know. I think it'd be cool because I know illagers really focus on the other gems. I know villagers specifically focus on emeralds, but if they could have a little bit of both, and maybe that's why we have suspicious sand and suspicious gravel, because these villagers end up hiding it so that way the illagers don't get rich and try to monopolize the villagers because they want to become self-sustaining and they want to become better, which is why they focus on emeralds, because emeralds are such an exclusive form of currency. You can only find it within the hills and the mountains. And these villagers, not only do they focus on mining the emeralds, they also focus on diamonds and gold because they know it's a profitable form of currency for both the player and other intelligent creatures like piglins and illagers and things of that nature. Our next villager house will be the terracotta villager house. I like to think of these houses as kind of being hilly, but at the same time, they'd be on top of this terracotta hill. And this is my man-made terracotta hill. It looks terrible, but I'm sure in the biome it would look gorgeous. And I like to think that they would have this very funky pattern, and they would use this from the glazed terracotta. And I think that would be cool to see those design blocks, because unless you do it yourself, you're not going to see any structures with these kinds of design blocks. And I think it'd be really cool to go into a house and be like, oh, this looks so pretty, I'm going to do this, instead of looking it up by yourself. I like to think that the armors are in the middle of the terracotta place because there are mine shafts specifically within the Badlands, I should say, because the terracotta, it's not called the Terracotta Hills, it's called the Badlands. The Badlands do tend to have mine shafts poking out of it, and I don't know if that's necessarily because of the generation or if that's just a quirk that the Badlands have. But I like to think that there are armors within the Badlands, and they make sure that they have an armor stand with chainmail armor, which is really cool because that's a kind of rare accessory. You need to have multiple armors in order to get all the chainmail items. Like, I was lucky with this. He gave me 3 pants, boots, and a helmet. But if you wanted all of it, I think it would be cool to have some of it here. And within the chest, I'd like to think that you would have certain enchantments for the armor, but more so you just have more armor in here. There would be a few diamonds maybe from the chest from the mine shafts and emeralds. And I think its main draw would be the fact that you get different flooring in each of the houses, different glazed flooring within the houses. It could be the magenta or the pink or the purple, or even the white glazed terracotta is a beautiful terracotta. And I feel like people don't necessarily look at this very much. I know I don't look at it very much. If I can remember how to place it, that would be great. See, that looks amazing. That's like a gorgeous pattern that not many people look at. And I feel like if we had the Badland villagers, you could have houses with all these little colorful blocks inside. Then it would just be really cool to see. Our next villager house would be the bamboo villager house. I like to think of this villager specifically being the butcher villager. And I know people think, oh, if it's a bamboo forest, you're not going to have any other animals other than a panda. Well, typically bamboo forests, they do have chickens and they do have pigs. And so I think they would be a butcher for chickens and pigs. And then they'd have pet pandas, or just pandas in general that they protect. Because in real life, pandas are endangered, and they could kind of tie it into the real world and be like, these villagers take care of pandas, but they also sustain themselves not on bamboo, but on animal products. And I think that would be really cool. I like to think that they would have some kelp, because sometimes they're near the oceans. I find bamboo places to be near oceans so they can get kelp there, and that's another source of food if they wanted to be vegetarian. And then they'd have bamboo, and they would have like eggs from the chickens and steak. Sorry, not steak, pork chops. I put steak in here, but I meant pork chops because I don't believe cows can spawn in a bamboo forest. I do have to look that up, so I will put that up on screen if I'm incorrect. But again, I'd like to think that even though they have both a furnace and a smoker, they have both because, of course, a village is going to have all kinds of different villagers. But specifically, they want to focus on being a butcher, and the kelp is also from the dried kelp blocks that they have. So they have a way to make large amounts of food similar to the hay bales, which they have in their village, and maybe they store that food in a time where they don't necessarily have the food necessary that they would prefer. Like, let's say if they're in a bamboo forest and they run out of chickens, they run out of pigs, then they would have the dried bamboo blocks, dried kelp blocks specifically. And these dried kelp blocks would be the way that they would sustain themselves. Our next villager is going to be something really, really different. It's going to be a cavern villager. I'd like to think that sometimes when you're mining, you might come across an iron door and you'll be like, oh, am I near a stronghold? Or is this a weird terrain glitch? And you press a little button on the side and you realize there's actually villagers in here. And you go into this little corridor that leads to all different kinds of villager houses. Not very many villager houses, but there's like a whole underground city of villagers who've just survived. You'd have a toolsmith focusing on like pickaxes and axes and sometimes shovels because they'd probably have a farm, maybe a tree farm. Maybe they would have a little like wheat farm, and they would probably eat some like mushroom stew, and maybe they'd have mushrooms. That would be cool if it was near a mushroom biome. And then the weaponsmith would have like axes, and they would make sure that everything is safe down here because they're closest to zombies compared to any other villager. And I know you and I have seen many villages that are right next to caverns, right next to ravines, right next to creepy crawly monsters, and if you do not defend them, they cannot defend themselves. I think it would be super cool if they could kind of protect themselves, even if it was something like an iron door, and it would be something where maybe the first entrance would be the iron door, but then the rest of the entrances would be the wooden door or something of that nature. I don't think there'd be many villagers in this area, but they would probably have mushroom stew. Maybe they'd have mushrooms that they hid within the caverns because finding a mushroom island could be more difficult. And of course they'd have iron, they'd have a pickaxe or two, they'd have some flint, and they'd have emeralds. Maybe you could even find a broken nether portal within their village, and they end up trying to figure out how they can get through the nether portal. Because these villagers are basically just like us. Of course, they're not quite like us. They're a little goofy. But they are a little bit like us, and I like to think that that's pretty cool. Our last villager for today will be the island villager. Specifically, a villager who can focus on cartography. Is that what it is? Cartography, yes. I like to think this villager is on an island or a couple of islands, and you get to travel, and instead of just plain open ocean that you're traveling across for like 20 minutes, especially in amplified worlds, sometimes you come across islands with villagers on them. And some of them hold maps, and a lot of them can take the maps to different places. Sometimes you'll get trial chamber maps, sometimes you'll get buried treasure maps, and these villagers like to take care of turtles because turtles are also endangered, and I think that'd be pretty cool to bring into the Minecraft game. They'd have compasses, they'd have paper, of course, to expand the map if you wanted to go on a basically pirate adventure, and you'd find these villagers on islands, and you'd be able to map up the whole ocean. And I'd like to pretend that this map up here would be like an already filled out map, and it has all the terrain for the surrounding area. Of course, I didn't do this here because I didn't want this to be basically all the other houses. I think that'd be a little silly. But maybe it would be already filled out, or they'd have it up in this little item frame, and then you could take it out. And then as you take it out, you could kind of just look at a map and fill it out a little bit, and then put it up here, and then people could see, oh, if I have a map, I can put it up in an item frame and actually see where everything is. which I think is pretty cool because I don't know a lot of people who necessarily do that unless they're specifically making a map room. So I don't know about the casual player doing that because, of course, if you do millions of maps, it's going to cause frame rate issues. But I think it'd be cool to have, like, maybe every so often a cartography villager can have an item frame in their house and it can have like a little map of the village or a map of the area. As well as all of these villagers having different kinds of housings and things like that, I wanted them all to have their different colored beds. Like the caverns one had a gray bed, the ones in the bamboo forest would have a yellow bed, and although it's not necessarily realistic because I know other villagers have, typically it's like white, yellow, and I believe blue beds are in the houses. I think having each biome specific villager having their own bed would be pretty cool. So, I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and please let me know if you'd like to see more. In my next Minecraft video, I'm going to try some modded stuff. My hardcore world, sadly, I died in it, and I should have realized that it was going to be more difficult than it was. But I am working on a modded Minecraft series, or at least 100 days of modded Minecraft, and I will also be working on some Minecraft builds in the background. If you'd like to see more, please let me know, and I hope you have a wonderful day.